Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Before I get started, I just wanted to let you know that there's a long bibliography of works that influence this talk at the end of my slides. So don't worry about furiously jotting things down. Also, I'm going to be sharing some quotes in my slides that are written on the slides, but I'm also going to read them out loud. So don't feel like you need to rush and read it while I'm talking about other things. It's slow time, so just sit back and relax. Don't try to multitask, something we do all too often to our detriment. Really be here, be present in this moment. The COVID-19 pandemic really did turn our world upside down, but it also acted as a mirror, making the cracks in our society's foundations unignorable. Even for the most fortunate of us who have jobs and can do them safely, it's shown us how the middle-class life we felt so secure about turns out to have been built upon a Jenga set, and removing a single piece sends the whole thing toppling. The support that you assume you'll get from the social safety net just isn't there. And that rugged individualism that our country has been so proud of is just rebranded selfishness. While a lot of inspiring mutual aid projects and collective action groups have arisen during COVID, we've seen that a significant portion of the population just don't see any value in solidarity. And I think the most frustrating part, at least for me, is recognizing this is how the system was designed to work. It's not a bug, it's a feature. In a culture focused on individualism and individual achievement, focused on people constantly proving their worth, on collecting accolades, in a culture that reifies hustle and that good old Horatio Alger myth of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, everything you do is a referendum on your worth. We live in a phony meritocracy. Success is seen as self-created, even when the person starts off at third base with all of the resources and connections that they could dream of. And anything other than success is a sign of personal weakness, even when it's caused by stuff that's totally beyond our control. Why have a social safety net when society is predicated on the notion that anyone can be successful if they just work hard enough? And if you're not a success, if you struggle, well, of course that's your fault. You didn't work hard enough, you weren't positive enough, you didn't manifest. I'll admit that for a long time, I bought into the idea that success and fulfillment were within my reach if I only worked hard enough and proved myself. But I found that the reward for my grinding and struggling was burnout and more work. Here's a quote that gets at this from Maris Kreitzman, who works in publishing. Where does ambition go when jobs disappear and the things you've been striving for barely even exist anymore? And what if the things for which you've been striving no longer feel important because they're the spoils of a rotten system that needs a complete overhaul? I still want to create and get paid for it, but our opportunities seem to be narrowing, the world becoming a little smaller each time. The scope of our ambitions must be downsized over and over again. It only took a few years of working in an office to realize that the idea of meritocracy is a lie, and the only thing hard work guarantees is unpaid overtime, not success. And our profession, just like hers, is built on that same broken foundation of white supremacy that is toxic to all but the most rich and powerful in our society. What I want to talk about today is the insidious ways that individualism and achievement culture show up and shape our work and our sense of self, and to propose an alternative. And that alternative is slow librarianship. But first, let me tell you a little bit about myself and my own positionality. I'm a bisexual, cisgendered woman who's married with one absolutely fantastic kid. My pronouns are she, her. I've been a librarian at Portland Community College for over 7 years, and I love the work I do. Before that, I was the head of library instruction at a large public urban research university, and before that at a small private rural university in New England. I wrote a regular column for American Libraries from 2007 to 2021, and I've been writing the blog Information Wants to Be Free since 2004. In my previous career, I was a clinical social worker doing child and family therapy with mostly BIPOC families in South Florida. I'm a proud union member. I'm a white settler living on occupied land of the Clackamas Chinook and Tualatin Kalapuya. I'm a Jewish woman whose father's family escaped persecution and systematic murder in the Ukraine as refugees to the US. And I'm the daughter of an immigrant mother. I was born into significant privilege by virtue of the color of my skin and being middle class. I think it's helpful to remember that each of us has a unique collection of identities and privileges that shape and define us. I have been extremely lucky in my career to work with really fantastic people who listened to my wacky ideas and gave me opportunities to lead and try new things and shine. And through that work, I've received more individual recognition than any one person really deserves, especially knowing that I always stood on the shoulders of giants. And while my CV might make it look like I have it all together, on the inside, I'm still the same messy, broken person I've always been. The trauma, anxiety, and depression that I've dealt with since childhood have left me forever searching for external validation to feel worthy. And honestly, I never felt worthy through any of those accomplishments. It's only fairly recently that I accepted that the migraines I deal with frequently are a disability and not just a weakness that I should muscle through. I'm also a work addict, which is also something I've only come to terms with recently. For the longest time, I saw that as a good work ethic, what I should be doing. And I received a ton of positive recognition for my work ethic, which only fueled the addiction. The host of the Harvard Business Review podcast, The Anxious Overachiever, said in one episode that work addiction is a socially acceptable addiction. You get a lot of reward and external validation. And I think all that can lull you into a sense that you're doing the right thing while you're killing yourself with work to avoid dealing with the pain and the trauma that the addiction is masking. And I think work addiction and the encouragement of work addiction is very much fostered and encouraged by capitalism. So what is achievement culture? It has a lot of dimensions, but I think in the workplace, you see it as an organizational culture that's focused on achieving wins and accolades that are really visible to external stakeholders. It's also focused on maximizing worker productivity. Since the Industrial Revolution, the most common measure of organizational success has been productivity. It's so long been believed that being more productive will make individuals and organizations more successful that most people don't even question it. And productivity is obviously big business with books and systems and apps all focused on making sure that you're using every single moment to its greatest advantage. Productivity gets into the personal sphere where achievement culture is focused on self-optimization and becoming the very best version of yourself, which of course is often based on external norms rather than your own authentic measures of success. And all of this is predicated on the myth of the meritocracy, that anyone can achieve great things and that we absolutely deserve the success that we have. Achievement culture is a culture of more. We should always be doing more, achieving more, adding to our existing work. And there's a real sense of urgency behind it. Let's add new services or programs without letting go of any existing things we do. Budget cuts? Well, we librarians can do more with less. Less staff? Well, gosh, we certainly won't cut hours or services. And if you're burnt out by all of that, well, gosh, you're just not resilient. A focus on individual achievement can create toxic cultures of scarcity and one-upmanship, where the focus becomes much more on being innovative than best meeting needs of the people that we're trying to serve. I was really inspired by Julia Glassman's 2017 article, The Innovation Fetish and Slow Librarianship, where she talked about how achievement culture has led to a virtual arms race at her place of work. Since the members of each year's peer review cohort are judged against each other, and it has been made clear that only a select few can ever earn the coveted marker of exceptional performance, the process has become an arms race of the biggest, most impressive accomplishments librarians can showcase. How do you play up the fact that you're a talented and beloved teacher when you have a colleague who just overhauled the entire information literacy curriculum for their subject area and deployed a brand new series of online instructional modules? Sure, that approach may not have been appropriate for the departments with which you liaise, but think about how these two stories look side by side. There's intense pressure to constantly innovate, to throw out the old and invent something new. And for those of us who've accepted the idea of meritocracy and embraced achievement culture in our work, we frequently discover that as we rack up these achievements, we don't actually find ourselves feeling better in any real way. Long before he ran for president or mayor of New York, Andrew Yang wrote a great piece on achievement culture for Quartz magazine. In his book, Excellent Sheep, William Deresiewicz described the current generation of strivers as driven to achieve without knowing why. And then they become paralyzed when they're not sure how to proceed. I jokingly call the hangups associated with the drive to achieve as the achievement demons. When I was growing up, I'd study for days trying to get good grades. When I'd get an A, I'd feel elation for about 30 seconds and then a feeling of emptiness. Rinse and repeat. Yang's own career illustrates how hard it is to resist our programming in this area, but research has shown time and again that the reward for high achievers is usually just more work. It's a never-ending treadmill of striving. So why do we keep running on this achievement culture treadmill when we never reach that place where we feel good enough or satisfied? And I think it's because of the persistent messages in our lives that we are not enough. I think women and people who've experienced trauma or oppression are particularly vulnerable to these messages, but our whole economy is designed around convincing people that they're not enough just as they are. Advertising, traditional media, and social media all serve to hammer in this idea of us not being good enough. And along with these messages about our worth is the promise that if we just do more, achieve more, or buy more, we'll somehow be made whole. So you can enjoy the present because you're always striving towards another goal. And you believe that once you reach that thing, your life is going to be better. But after that, there's another project and another goal and another and another. The goalposts just keep moving, but you keep running on that treadmill, believing that a time will come when you feel fully fulfilled and whole. But if you're looking for fulfillment through external validation, you are never going to find it. And perhaps others in your life will happily capitalize on that never-ending need to please. Achievement culture is a tool that capitalism uses to keep workers striving and competing against one another rather than looking for the man behind the curtain. And as Carl Honore says in his fantastic book about the slow movement, it begins to feel like we're serving the economy while the economy only serves the super rich and powerful. That's neoliberalism at work. And that's exactly how the system was designed to work all the way back to our nation's founding. It was designed to benefit the people in power and to justify the suffering or oppression of others. How else could a country that's ostensibly founded on liberty and freedom justify the near genocide of one group of human beings and the enslavement of another? People in power were portrayed as superior and harder working. People who suffered in poverty or because of oppression or slavery were portrayed as deficient and deserving of their place in life. The stealing of land was literally seen as our destiny from on high, manifest destiny. White supremacy culture built this nation, and it's led to a growing inequality that harms both white people and people of color, though BIPOC families are disproportionately impacted. In the fantastic book, The Sum of Us, Heather McGhee lays out how white supremacy and slavery, while harming people of color the most severely, also has harmed poor and middle-class white people. And this system is kept in place, not just by the people in power, but by the caste system they created that leads so many white people to see any improvement in the status of people beneath them as a threat to their status and well-being. It keeps all of us divided and isolated from each other. And it's all justified through the idea of meritocracy, that anyone can succeed if they only work hard enough. And it's all a lie. McGee writes, the antiquated belief that some groups of people are better than others distorts our politics, drains our economy, and erodes everything Americans have in common, from our schools to our air to our infrastructure. And everything we believe comes from a story we've been told. There are other systems of oppression that impact us in our profession and our ability to serve our patrons equitably. Vocational awe is a term coined by Fobazi Ettar, which envisions the profession as calling and the institution as a sacred beacon of democracy. And that works to position the library as an institution that's beyond critique, which prevents the recognition of harm and meaningful improvement. It also positions those working in the profession as selfish jerks if they put their well-being first, because it means they're not devoted enough. While the term was coined by a librarian, it shows up in all sorts of helping professions like social work, teaching, nursing, and more. Having been a social worker, I definitely saw those same dynamics at play there. There was no limit to how much you could and should martyr yourself to your job. Another piece of that you are not enough puzzle is the focus on self-optimization. Companies, social media, and the self-help industry are all selling the idea that you can be better in every single part of your life. You can be a more productive worker, you can be a better partner, parent, friend, colleague. You could work out more, you could eat better, you could have a more beautiful home. You could turn your hobbies into paying gigs. You could use every minute of every day more effectively. And how dare you waste a moment of time not living your best life? But all of that begs the question, why? To what end are we forever optimizing our lives? We're not computers, we're not machines, we're people. The point of life isn't to use every single moment to its fullest. When people feel like they're wasting their time or not living their best life, they can't enjoy the life that they have. But it's big business because people spend tons of money trying to make themselves and their lives look more like the outward norms of success that they see. I'd love to see the term living your best life completely removed from the English language. It's created this toxic pressure to constantly optimize ourselves. The achievement culture that Julia Glassman described creates a terrible environment of competition. But what's more, it isolated people from each other. Capitalism wants workers to compete with each other. They want to create these phony divisions, professional versus paraprofessional, full-time versus part-time, working class versus knowledge workers. These are structures that keep us from uniting to advocate for justice and better working conditions for all of us, because we fear using the teeny tiny advantages and privilege that we might have. They want us isolated. They want us to feel alone because that makes us feel vulnerable and it makes us grind harder and it makes us focus on achieving things rather than building relationships, which really, when you think about it, is the true heart of our work as library workers. And when we treat relationships as transactional or just a means to an end, we never build the deep connections that are required for a truly knowing and supporting and being part of a community. And all of this is at the heart of toxic work environments, where people view their colleagues as threats or competitors instead of rightly turning their attention toward the people in power who are responsible for the culture. In toxic work environments, difference is treated as especially threatening. A passionate new librarian with big ideas a BIPOC library worker. Katrina Davis Kendrick has documented toxic work environments in her research on both academic and public libraries, and it is very much worth watching her presentations on YouTube and looking up her articles. She's demonstrated that while toxic work environments are terrible for all workers, BIPOC librarians experience abuse and neglect at far greater frequency and severity than do white librarians. If you read Tima Oken's description of how white supremacy shows up in organizations, it clearly shows how white supremacy culture is toxic for everyone, but is especially harmful to our BIPOC colleagues. Elements like urgency, perfectionism, power hoarding, and paternalism, and also fear of open conflict keep all workers from feeling safe showing up as their authentic selves. And again, this is how the system was made to work, because it keeps us isolated and anxious, grinding away as hard as we can so we don't have time or space to see ourselves as exploited workers. If we keep our noses to the grindstone, we'll never see the barely visible strings on all workers that are being pulled by the people in power. I'd like to believe that slow librarianship offers us a better way. And I want to start by looking at the history of the slow movement. So the slow movement started with slow food. The slow food movement was a response to the impact of globalization on food. And it came to prominence when members protested the opening of a McDonald's at the Spanish Steps in Rome. While the movement started in Italy, it became an international movement focused on enjoying food, appreciating terroir and local food culture, and ethically sourcing food. The three main tenets of the slow food movement are good, clean, and fair. And they mainly relate to social justice, sustainability, quality, and pleasure. Excellent values to live by. Can you imagine similar tenets or values for librarianship? The Slow Food Manifesto clearly spoke to a lot of people. The idea of slow has now been adopted in areas as diverse as parenting, medicine, urban design, religion, teaching, and so much more. These ideas have pushed me to question so many assumptions I'd long accepted as reality. And I'm grateful that we're starting to question these assumptions of our capitalist society that just aren't serving the vast majority of us. I'd read about slow in other contexts, but it wasn't until I read Julia Glassman's article in 2017 that I started to think about the idea of applying slow to our own profession. And it wasn't until my own realizations about my work addiction that I really started to consider what slow librarianship might look like for me. In her article, Glassman explicitly declined to describe what slow librarianship might look like for our profession. She focused more on defining the problems that necessitate the change. But I think this last sentence gives us a clue about what she was thinking. Perhaps if we reject the capitalist drive to constantly churn out new products and instead take a stand to support more reflective and responsive practices, we can offer our patrons services that are deeper, more lasting, and more human. I love that vision. Based on that, and on my own readings and reflections, here's an attempt at defining what slow librarianship might look like. Slow librarianship is an anti-racist, responsive, and values-driven practice that stands in opposition to neoliberal values. Workers in slow libraries are focused on relationship building, deeply understanding and meeting patron needs, and providing equitable services to their communities. And internally, slow library culture is focused on learning and reflection, collaboration and solidarity, valuing all kinds of contributions, and supporting staff as whole people. Slow librarianship is a process, not a destination. It's an orientation towards our work, ourselves, and the people around us that creates positive change. It's an organizational philosophy that supports workers and builds stronger relationships within our communities. Slow isn't necessarily about doing less. The opposite of achievement culture isn't not caring about our work or embracing mediocrity, though for some it may mean doing less if they're currently overworking and harming themselves. The opposite of achievement culture is slowing down to think about why we're doing what we're doing so that we can do our most meaningful and best work. The opposite of achievement culture is not being driven by a desire for external recognition or approval, and instead being driven by our values and the needs of our patrons, as well as concerns about our own well-being. Now I'll try to share my vision of the characteristics of slow librarianship. These characteristics are not the be-all, end-all by any stretch, and I hope that it will spawn conversations about what slow librarianship might look like in your setting or how it might impact your orientation towards your work. We're all working in very different organizational cultures with different limitations and priorities and affordances. Slow librarianship isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's a philosophy and approach towards our work rather than something that's really prescriptive. Like the definition from the slow food movement, broken up into good, clean, and fair, I broke the characteristics up into 3 categories: good, humane or human, and thoughtful. And each has a list of characteristics related to it. I think for a library to be good, we first have to recognize where we've fallen short in the past and where we continue to fall short in the present. Librarians who embrace slow will also embrace critical practice. Instead of taking things as truths because they've been that way forever, we're going to question the assumptions and power structures that lie beneath them. Just like how many of us now see that vocational awe represents a power structure designed to remove our ability to self-advocate and care for ourselves, there's so many norms and assumptions and power structures that harm our patrons and our colleagues. Fines, for example, in a vacuum seem okay because they're theoretically applied equally to everyone. But in reality, we know that they disproportionately harm poor families and people of color and often prevent these populations from even using the library. I think we have to acknowledge the harm that libraries have caused to marginalized communities and individuals. We can't improve until we can recognize that libraries have not always been good for everyone. And the next step, once we see behind that veil, is to dismantle the structures that oppress, that exclude, that create inequalities. It amazes me that so many libraries see hiring library workers of color as the only thing they need to do to create an anti-racist library. If that library's culture is built upon a white supremacist foundation, the library will not be a place that includes and values the perspective of BIPOC library workers. The literature is chock full of stories about the abuse and neglect that BIPOC librarians have suffered in libraries, even in positions specifically designed to help BIPOC librarians succeed, like diversity residencies. Becoming an anti-racist library really means looking within the structure of the library to see how white supremacy culture operates. I mentioned this before, and it's in my bibliography at the end of my slides, but Tima Okun's white supremacy culture document can be a great starting off point for organizations looking to identify and dismantle white supremacy culture and practices in their organizations. Here you can see the topics covered in an adapted version of Okun's work that I also linked to in the bibliography. I'm sure you've seen some of these characteristics in your own institutions. I've not worked in a single library that doesn't exhibit some of these characteristics, if not all of them. They're so clearly tied to achievement culture, capitalism, and individualism that it's no surprise that we've all internalized it. I found it both helpful and disturbing to see how many of these that I personally exemplified in my own work. And that led me to try and let go of assumptions and combat behaviors in myself that contribute to white supremacy in my organization. We owe it to our BIPOC colleagues and patrons to do this work, and dismantling white supremacy holds the promise to improve quality of life for all of us. I think we also need to not just dismantle, but envision a radically different future that doesn't center whiteness, a vision that will ideally come from our BIPOC colleagues. A good way to avoid a focus on innovation and visible wins is to ensure that your organization is led by its mission and values. If your library doesn't already have a value statement, this is a good time to work with your colleagues to develop one. Connecting around values can help staff see what they're really working for, which at times like this is so needed. I know when I'm feeling burned out, connecting with my why can help me remember what I've always been passionate about. We should use our values to resist trends and initiatives that are in opposition to our professional and institutional values, like things that compromise patron privacy. And when the library is doing any sort of planning, the staff should weigh priorities based on how in line they are with the library's values. They would also hopefully weigh priorities based on a deep knowledge of the needs of their community. Libraries are not equitably serving their community if they're not laser focused on their most oppressed and needy members. We should be judged by how we engage and serve those community members. This requires actually understanding their needs and wants, which means not only doing assessment, but also building relationships in our community and collaborating with other groups that serve those populations. Never has the need for human and humane organizations been more apparent than during this pandemic. No matter what our living situation or privilege, the past 18 months have been traumatic, and the idea that work can just be business as usual is absurd. I'm so inspired by organizations that have recognized this, where leaders are supporting their staff as whole people with bodies and families and needs beyond the workplace. But there are plenty of organizations that have treated their workers like widgets, putting them in harm's way, laying them off in the absence of budget cuts. And it's completely unconscionable. All library workers deserve better than that. What did communication look like at your job when the pandemic struck? Did administration check in with how people were coping? Did they tell staff that they didn't expect you to get as much done and to focus on yourself and your family? A people-first organization is one that cares about its people as people. You are so much more than what you contribute to your workplace. And a good supervisor would care about your well-being. A humane library would create an environment where all staff feel a sense of psychological safety. They don't have to hide parts of themselves, the fact that they're a parent, their chronic illness, their culture. People in humane organizations also feel supported in setting boundaries that maximize their well-being. They don't feel pressured to stay late at work because the boss does, or to do more than others to make sure their job is secure. And I think it takes proactive communication from managers to create that kind of environment. Bosses, if you are waiting for your employees to come and ask you for help, you're doing it wrong. Early in the pandemic, when my son needed a ton of help with homeschooling, I felt enormous pressure to work more than I normally did because I had so much experience with online teaching and could help others get up to speed. And at my workplace, there were no explicit messages to parents struggling through this or messages to any of us about workload expectations. That silence made me feel shame about my limitations. And instead of taking the time I needed to support my son's well-being as well as my own, I just put work first. And I think that experience broke me in some fundamental way, but it also helped me to more thoroughly change my relationship to work. We all need to find ways to create boundaries that allow us to take care of ourselves and our loved ones. Self-care is more than just spa days and buying stuff we want. It's not about consumerism. It's about resting. It's about erecting healthy boundaries. It's about self-compassion. It's about creating space for ourselves so that we can focus on community care. Because when we are totally stressed and depleted, our ability to show up for others also suffers. You can't be compassionate towards others if you're not first compassionate towards yourself. But slow librarianship can't just be about us as individuals. We have to focus on creating environments where everyone, regardless of status in the organization, has the ability to prioritize their well-being. The obsession with productivity and producing is incredibly short-sighted. We all know that there's value in not spending every waking moment moving the needle forward on projects. The time that I spend talking to a colleague may not look like work, but I'm often building capacity for collaboration, sharing knowledge, decreasing stress, or leading to a better work culture. Time spent visiting community groups or at community meetings may not be directly related to a specific project, but it probably results in learning more about your community and how to serve it better. The more our relationships with our colleagues and others in the community are transactional, the less likely they'll be to bear valuable collaborative fruit. Some of my best instructional collaborations with faculty in my liaison areas grew out of my just being around or from my attempts to build relationships without a specific goal in mind. But also, spending time not working towards a specific goal is critical to our creativity and ultimately our productivity. I know when I feel like I have way too much on my plate, my ability to do anything decreases. I feel like an overloaded computer where every program slows down and I'm constantly buffering. Research has shown that giving employees space and time is actually good for the bottom line. And people absolutely need fallow time and time talking to others to be creative. The cult of productivity speaks to that need we have to feel busy and therefore worthwhile. In America, being busy has become a status symbol, and that's not the case around the world. In America, if you're busy, you have to be important. It's like it's a way to cover up our existential dread, but ultimately it's just more of that same treadmill running. In Julia Glassman's article about innovation and slow librarianship, she talked about that arms race at her place of work to be the most innovative and thus earn that top designation in their annual review. It was a great example of how our current reward systems are designed to reward individual genius rather than the teamwork that's needed to make most great projects happen. Capitalism is all about getting workers fighting and competing with one another so that they work harder and don't focus on the people in charge who are actually oppressing them. The current reward systems, both within libraries and in our organizations, provide incentives for people to not work in teams, or if they are in teams, to focus on making sure that they stand out. And yet we know that most big things in libraries are not done by a single person, but most awards are still designed to recognize an individual. We need to change our recognition and reward systems to reward being a great team member, to reward those who help others to shine. This will help to prevent toxic cultures where people feel in competition with each other. And also, we need to not only reward the creation of hot new things, but also the maintenance and improvement of existing valued services. Where's the best maintainer award? I truly believe the most important change we can make is to be in solidarity with our fellow workers. This requires us to focus less on ourselves and our desire to shine, to rise, or to receive external recognition. To focus more on community care and our efforts to see everyone in our community rise is the most important thing we could do. It requires a huge change in our mindset when capitalism wants us to see ourselves as individuals in competition, but will never create meaningful change unless we can come together as a collective. What would a thoughtful, contemplative organization actually look like? The more I've intentionally tried to slow down in my work, the more I've thought about what it would be like to work in an organization that actually valued slowing down. It would be amazing to feel like I'm not constantly swimming against the current. When we're single-mindedly focused on finishing a project, we can miss out on valuable collaborative learning and team building that comes from taking time and valuing the process. I've led our library's annual instructional assessment program several times in recent years. And I've learned more from collaborating and reflecting together with my colleagues than I actually did from the assessment itself. If I was focused on achieving perfection or was afraid to fail or wanted to get things done as quickly as possible, we would never have seen those benefits. But you can't value process over product if you're afraid of failure or you feel a sense of urgency from above. And this also speaks to my next point about a learning culture. To me, a learning culture means a space where workers want to know more about their patrons' needs and how they use the library, where workers are given time and funding to learn, and where the organization comes together to learn and reflect collectively. I think time is one of the most important pieces in all of this. We simply can't grow if we're all too busy to reflect on what we're doing. I can't become a better teacher if I'm constantly teaching class after class without time to reflect on what went well and what didn't. I talked before about how our current system of recognition and reward is designed to recognize the individual, but also I found that our whole profession is incredibly stingy with recognition of any kind. And all that does, of course, is create a scarcity mindset where people feel like they're in competition. Recognition is one of very few things that is endlessly renewable. People don't necessarily need money or a plaque. Sometimes just being called out in a meeting or sending someone an appreciative email can make all the difference. And when you feel appreciated, your motivation increases. I really do believe that a culture of appreciation and gratitude in the workplace can lead to a shift in people's mindsets. I know some of you have probably looked at these characteristics and thought, that sounds great, but my library culture is nothing like that, and it's not really within my sphere of influence to change it. We all have different limitations and opportunities at work and in our own lives to make changes. And that's why I see slow librarianship more as a philosophy or approach than an exact destination. Even if we can't change our library culture, we can change our own mindset and how we operate within that culture. That could create small cultural shifts or could at least help protect ourselves from a harmful organizational culture. So I want to focus the end of the presentation on things that we can do as individuals. I think a valuable first step is to work on your own attention and reflective practice. We spend so much of our time running on autopilot. And when you get out of that and start reflecting deeply on what you're feeling and what's happening around you, everything else in slow librarianship flows from that. You can see your work more clearly. You'll be better able to identify ways to slow down and things that are causing you needless pain. If you notice things more, you'll be better able to see and question those problematic assumptions and structures that undergird our work. In her book, How to Do Nothing, Jenny Odell talks about her dissatisfaction, quote, with untrained attention, which flickers from one thing to the next, not only because it's a shallow experience or because it's an expression of habit rather than will, but because it gives me less access to my own human experience. It truly had not occurred to me until I read her book how much I was letting my own anxiety and the attention economy drive what I paid attention to. Taking better control of our attention is a real process, and it's something that I'm still working on every single day. But you quickly start to notice so much more in your world when you start doing that work. For me, the most important thing that I've gotten out of my mindfulness practice is a habit of slowing down and paying attention to how I'm feeling in the moment. Before, I really felt held hostage by my anxiety and was very reactive. But now I'm working on sitting with my discomfort and really considering what's causing it. The book Radical Compassion by Tara Brach really helped me to slow down, to try to understand my feelings, and most importantly, to practice some very, very needed self-compassion. It's important to think about what your most deeply held values are and your why. What might your work look like if you were led more by your values than by achievement culture? Last year, I was listening to the wonderful podcast, Everything Happens, when the host, Kate Bowler, she's a professor at Duke Divinity School living with stage 4 cancer, asked, am I built from the outside in or am I built from the inside out? And I found that question so provocative. How much are our visions of success based on external visions of success or a desire for external validation? I used to be a middle manager on the path to becoming a library director. I was climbing that ladder, and I realized that it absolutely was not what I wanted to do. I love teaching and working with students. I love being a part of a labor union. I love the work I do now, and not wanting to move up doesn't make me unambitious. A big part of finding your own path is not comparing yourself to others. Until recently, I never considered what it would mean if I was enough right now, right in this moment. Asking that question really changed me. What if you were good enough just as you are today? What if you didn't need to constantly keep proving your worth? How might that sense of enoughness change your own priorities? I've been spending a lot of time thinking about how I uphold white supremacy and recognizing, as I said earlier, that a lot of the aspects of achievement culture and work addiction that I used to embody were absolutely characteristics of white supremacy culture. It takes deep attention to really interrogate our assumptions and the structures in our workplaces and to be able to engage in this work. I'm trying to do better, and I recognize that, like slow librarianship, this is an absolutely lifelong process. The next one, whoops, sorry, went to the wrong slide. The next one is a huge challenge for me. I'm really bad at asking for what I need at work. Because of experiences in my childhood, asking for help brings up like intense feelings of shame for me. But we have to feel safe asking for what we need to be successful at work. We need to be able to set boundaries that nurture our well-being, because we are less able to support others when we are depleted or burnt out or miserable. I've gotten a lot better at saying no and resisting the urge to raise my hand. Sometimes I just need to step back and not get involved in things that I know are going to cause me harm. It can be helpful to also identify what leaves you feeling depleted or resentful. I've been in a lot of leadership positions for projects, and I found myself getting frustrated because I felt like I needed to basically helicopter mom, my colleagues to get things done on time. And it made me really resentful, and I stopped doing it. And yes, some things didn't get done or got done late, but surprisingly, the world didn't end, because librarianship is not a life or death field. And I have to say that I felt a whole lot less resentful and stressed because I didn't feel responsible for other people's work and their lives. Also consider how you and other people at your place of work might foster a culture of appreciation and recognition. A while back, I read Adam Grant's terrific book, Give and Take, and I was inspired by his practice of expressing gratitude to work associates. I started writing thank you cards to colleagues who I really appreciated, telling them what I appreciate about them. It only required a small amount of effort, but the impact was huge. The colleagues I sent it to felt great, and I felt great about doing it. it also just put me in a frame of mind for looking for my colleagues doing good rather than looking for things they did wrong. And we need to normalize those sorts of cultures of appreciation and community care. It's so important to think about how you can slow down at work and spend more time learning, reflecting, thinking, and talking to others. It's those moments that help us become more creative and more energized for our work. They are absolutely not wastes of time, but essential to doing your best work. Remember, you don't need to be doing all the things to be enough. Finally, I think the most important thing we can do is orient ourselves towards community care and solidarity with our fellow workers. Shifting our mindset from this culture of individualism and achievement that we were born in requires a big shift in our mindset. And it's really, really hard, but it's absolutely necessary if we want to create better workplace and a better world. Otherwise, slow librarianship will be just like mindfulness and so many other movements that only end up benefiting those with the most privilege. So many of us have little control over the culture of our workplaces, but that doesn't mean we have to give in to the prevailing culture. We have to decide who we want to be and how we can model that in our work. Sometimes we have to resist the dominant culture. Sometimes we have to say no. I pick my battles better now, but I've also determined what my most strongly held values are, and I let those guide me. And I stay in the fight, and I resist things that are antithetical to my values. My hope is that modeling slow librarianship in our own behavior can create small changes in the culture. But even if it doesn't, I found that it just feels better to live my values and honor my boundaries than to give in. The most important thing to remember is that it only takes one small step forward to start moving in the right direction. And when you do that, you're joining a community of library workers who believe that a better future is possible. Thank you so much for listening. You can find my slides at the link below, which also includes my bibliography at the end. And if you have any questions or thoughts, I would love for you to share them with me at one of the many ways to get in contact with me. Thank you so much.